Hi guys, and it is Kate here for another Victober video. And this one was one that just doing all of the filming and planning, thinking about the different novels I wanted to read and why I wanted to read them got me thinking, what is it in particular about Victorian literature that I love so much? And I started thinking about my favorite Victorian novels, maybe what those have in common, and then also just started Googling like common themes and elements in Victorian novels. And so I was actually able to come up with 10 reasons that I'm really excited to tell you all about. And reason number one is the length. So I know this is the precise reason why many readers would say they stay away from Victorian literature. It seems long-winded. And I guess on the other hand, I view it as it's people not rushing when they're telling a story. They have a lot that they want to include and a lot that they want to say. And so I really appreciate that the time that it takes me to read a Victorian novel, especially more challenging ones. I've talked about how George Eliot's books are challenging to me, but they have so much staying power. And it's something that I really appreciate. And so I think that when I think about the books that I remember, Victorian classics really stick with me more than shorter modern books do. And sometimes, I'm in the mood for like a cozy mystery that probably won't stay with me that well, but it's really fun to read. But other times it's just really fun to read a compelling Victorian novel that I know I will remember a lot, and there's going to be so many interesting quotes, and they're able to incorporate a lot of different plot lines that way, keeping books that long. And I'm thinking of Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I think there's about 6 different plot lines in Bleak House. But it's just a masterpiece then when it comes to the end. So yes, I think the length is actually one thing that I love about Victorian novels. Reason number 2 is I find that in Victorian novels, they reach a sweet spot for me between beautiful writing and plot. I think that a lot of time in modern literary fiction, there is beautiful writing, but barely anything happens. Or I'll read a mystery where there is lots happening, but not very good quality of writing. There are those more literary mysteries that I've talked about, but I think overall what I see in Victorian novels is just a lovely balance of beautiful writing, but really interesting and suspenseful and mysterious plots. And I think it's really neat, especially I'm thinking about Thomas Hardy or Elizabeth Gaskell, where, these crazy things are happening, but then, Elizabeth Gaskell will take a couple paragraphs just to pause and give like reflective thoughts on the landscape or the inner dialogue of the characters, and I really appreciate that about Victorian novels. Reason number 3 is the capital R romantic nature of Victorian novels. So when people say something nowadays is romantic, they mean it to, they're talking about, romantic love between two people. But when I'm saying capital R romantic, I mean when people talk about the Romantic era, and Victorian literature is very much romantic literature. The Romantic period doesn't necessarily totally line up exactly with when the Victorian era was, but there's a lot of overlap. And you see that especially in things like the Bronte's novels, just very intense emotions, intense settings, and just plots that are just kind of the highest of the high and the lowest of the low. They were big fans of tragedy, and so I just love reading these stories where I just can feel things so very deeply while I read them. I just love Sylvia's Lovers for that. It is very tragic, but I just get to feel so much while I'm reading that, and I find it to be incredibly engaging. Reason number 4 is the love of nature that you see in Victorian novels, and kind of this emotional attachment that they had to nature. And I think it really makes sense that they would have this emotional attachment because of industrialization. So it's kind of almost this look back on more rural England. Thomas Hardy referred to it as the ache of modernism, which I think is an excellent and poignant way to put it. And I think that you just see in different books, I'm thinking of Lorna Doone, where they live in the woods, how much they appreciate the nature around them and how much it really feeds their character throughout the book. And the Woodlanders and Wives and Daughters has actually a fair amount about nature. And then in North and South, when at the beginning of the novel, Margaret is living in the rural, just beautiful, luscious south of England. And then she really sees a contrast when she moves to Helston, and it's, more industrial north. And so she's really longing for that more natural environment that she grew up in. But I think in all of those, and those are just a few examples, you can really see how much they appreciated nature. And I myself I love being in nature. I love taking walks. I love spending lots of time outside. And so that's something that I really appreciate about Victorian books. Reason number 5 is that domesticity is romanticized. So even though I do love spending lots of time in nature, I am also a homebody. So I love to be at home, and even my son, sometimes I'll give him the option of going to the park or looking at books, and sometimes now he will choose looking at books. And my husband is the same way. I just love the idea, the notion of a home being this cozy haven, and just this place that you can truly relax. And I think the Victorians really felt that. They wanted the home to be thought of as a haven. And I think you can see that with the little domestic details you're given. And yeah, just this like domesticity and everyday life is kind of glorified. I think you really see this in the TV series of Lark Rise to Candleford, but also in the book Lark Rise to Candleford, but also in Jane Eyre. Kind of houses can be mysterious, but houses can also be kind of a haven from crazy problems that are happening. I think also in Margaret Oliphant's Salem Chapel, I was really struck by how cozy the houses seemed in that. And I think also, I didn't want to forget, I also listed the Warden and Barchester Towers. I think Anthony Trollope really, loved domesticity, loved, having a cozy and welcoming home. And so I think that, for those of you who are watching who are into hygge, the coziness, I think that you can see some of that in Victorian novels, which is really neat since it's, kind of almost a trend now. And so it's neat that it's something that is in books from a while ago. Reason number 6 is Victorian novels were when the birth of crime writing happened. So The Moonstone is credited as the first detective novel, with Sergeant Cuff coming in and, figuring out who stole the Moonstone. But then doing some more research, there's a novel by Artie Blackmore, who I read Lorna Doone by him, and I love Lorna Doone, called Clara Vaughan. I first heard about this from Katie at Books and Things, and Clara Vaughan is about a woman who, when she was a child, when she was a little girl, her father was murdered. And when she comes into adulthood, she decides she's going to figure out who murdered her father, which is really intense. So I do think I did see on a couple different discussion sites people saying that actually no, Clara Vaughan should be credited for this. But either way, however it happened, the Victorians were the people to really come up with crime writing. And so kind of this seedy, despicable murder happens, this senile act, and this, moral, upright, upstanding citizen comes in and saves the day. Although even as soon as Conan Doyle was Sherlock Holmes, Holmes can be kind of an anti-hero. He's, extremely lacking in empathy. He's addicted to opium. And so already, in the Victorian era, there were interesting things happening with that. But either way, I just think it's so cool that one of my favorite genres was when, crime writing began. Reason number 7 is I think there is a focus on how people interact with their community. I think you definitely see this in Cranford with all of the ladies kind of being such a big part of the town. You see this in Middlemarch, and I am really looking forward to Katie from Books and Things is going to talk about small towns in Victorian literature, and she's going to use Cranford and Middlemarch as examples. But also Lark Rise to Candleford by Flora Thompson, which did not come out in the Victorian era, but it's about her Victorian childhood. and then wives and daughters also. You kind of see how these people relate to the landscape and the communities that they're in. And I think that's something in the modern age, when we've had the invention of the telephone, the TV, and internet. I think that's something that we really lose touch with our communities, and we feel very other from our communities. And my husband and I, we had neighbors over for dinner the other night, and that is just becoming more and more rare. And I think people don't think of knowing your community, knowing your neighbors as an asset, but I think in times of need, it's really awesome to know neighbors that can help you, but also in times of plenty, to kind of have joy over the different good events that are happening in your life. So I really appreciate that there's a real awareness of the community around people in Victorian novels. Reason number 8 is the amount of interaction with the readers. So in Jane Eyre, she continually addresses the reader. In The Moonstone, Gabriel Betteridge specifically, I'm thinking of, addressing the reader and saying things like, oh, this part of the story is really boring. Let's skip over this. I don't want to bore you, and let's go to the next part. Lorna Doone, he addresses the reader. And also in many, many Dickens, he will reference the reader. And so I really like that. It just makes you feel that you are a part of the story. You are joining all of the characters on their journey, and you feel that you really have an investment in the story. And I think that's something that is just a really neat device to have in literature. Reason number 9 is the high emphasis on the human connection. So I think there is something about Victorian literature that's really spectacular, something about the relationships that the characters have with one another. The human connection is just valued so highly, and people having rewarding and engaging relationships is considered just such a value. And then you see how it kind of torments people when they are misunderstood or torn apart from someone that they love. And so I really do find I love to know people and to know people well, and I see a love for that in Victorian literature as well. And the last reason is the humor. I love humor in Victorian novels. Some of them are definitely more serious than others, but things like the Pickwick Papers is such a hoot. There's one scene in the Pickwick Papers where one of the gentlemen, who I can't even remember his name right now, but he goes to his hotel room, and he's sitting in his bed, and there are curtains around the bed, and then a lady thinks it's her hotel room, and so she goes and she's sitting at the night table brushing her hair, and he peeks out of the curtains and is like, "Excuse me," and then it's just this huge crazy chaotic scene where she thinks he's trying to attack her, and it's just humorous in only a way that Dickens can do it. And then I'm also thinking of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is a series of little vignettes, basically. And in one of the vignettes, there are 2 characters, and they are going to they want to make a lace collar. They want to dye it cream, so they put it in buttermilk and they sit it in a bowl, and a cat that one of the ladies owns eats the lace collar in the buttermilk. And so then there's a whole part where they give the cat laxative to get the lace collar back, and it's just it's written in such a way that's so funny. But also, even in the more serious novels, there are little bits of humor. I'm also thinking about Elizabeth Gaskell's Ruth, where there are very serious and sometimes tragic things happening, but in the midst of that, there are these little moments of joy and of laughter, and I really do appreciate that. So those are my 10 reasons that I love Victorian literature. Please let me know if you thought of some that I did not think of. I love to think about Victorian literature, obviously, because I'm participating in Victober. And I will see you guys for another video soon. Bye.